I'm not particularly proud that I have been married 7 times. To me, that's quite a number.
Lana Turner was not merely the most radiant symbol of beauty for MGM Studios. She was the very incarnation of yearning and that lethal glamour that the media of those times were forever poised to hunt down at any price. Every step she took upon the Hollywood red carpet was inextricably linked to seismic romances and the most powerful men on earth. But pause and look closely at those godlike faces. Were they truly the refined gentlemen the public so fervently worshipped, or behind those luxurious black tuxedos? Were they in truth deceitful bastards, perverted abusers ready to trample over the corpses of women to satisfy their animalistic lusts and protect their own filthy reputations? In 1995, as the velvet curtain of life was poised to close forever due to a relentless and cruel cancer, the silver screen star did not choose to depart in silence. Instead, her final testament erupted like a bomb that shook the entire cinematic empire. As she decided to expose the identities of 6 illustrious actors, men she bluntly branded as bastards who had used betrayal and illicit lust to tear her soul asunder. This is not merely a list of paramours. This is the definitive list exposing these bastards to the core. A direct indictment of predators masquerading as idols. A journey to strip away the squalid secrets hidden behind Hollywood's brilliant luster. Where elegance is but a mask for those who wear sophisticated suits yet harbor savage hearts, ready to trample and stifle the very lives of women just to gratify their own vile egos. 1. Johnny Stompanato, the mafia nightmare and the shackles of an illicit affair. In 1995, as her breath grew ragged from a relentless cancer and her radiant stardom faded into fragments of memory, Lana Turner decided to carry out one final spiritual execution. She tore open the velvet curtain of her past to expose the man she branded the slimiest nightmare of human existence, Johnny Stompanato. The horror began in the spring of 1957 while Lana stood at the peak of her fame, basking in a prestigious Oscar nomination for Peyton Place, while the world knelt at her feet. A predatory plot was being orchestrated from the shadows of the criminal underworld. Johnny Stompanato did not reveal himself as a crude thug. Instead, he donned the mask of John Steele, a sophisticated gentleman who sowed fascination through hundreds of snow-white orchids and erotic letters delivered directly to her MGM dressing room. Lana confessed in her memoirs, "Johnny didn't walk into my life. He crawled into it like a slow-acting poison seeping through silk. He knew I was craving a rebellion against the studio empire, and he turned himself into a lethal antidote." She was blissfully unaware that John Steele was actually a trusted henchman of the notorious mob boss Mickey Cohen. His hunger was not for her heart, but for the deed to a million-dollar icon of beauty. This illicit romance rapidly decayed into a humiliating shackle of slavery. Lana bitterly revealed that she had been reduced to a living bank account, surreptitiously funding Stompanato's extravagant lifestyle like a high-end gigolo. Behind his facade of feigned devotion, the mobster was weaving a web of terror. He secretly compiled a black file of Lana's lustful handwritten letters and sensitive photographs to hold her in a state of eternal blackmail. In secluded villas from the coast of Mexico to the heart of London, under the alias Mr. and Mrs. Steele. She mistakenly believed she was being loved, while in reality, she was nurturing a beast that used her own money to keep other mistresses and feed the mob's coffers. Stompanato's tyrannical nature erupted with savage violence the moment his ownership of this gold mine was threatened. The horrific 1958 incident in London served as proof that he was ready to turn a film set into a slaughterhouse. When Lana attempted to break the relationship to save her career, he stormed onto the set of Another Time, Another place impressed the cold. Black muzzle of a gun against the head of a young Sean Connery right before her eyes. Lana recalled the ultimate humiliation. He bellowed the filthiest insults, calling me a cheap woman in front of the entire crew in those pitch-black eyes. I saw the madness of a demon. He wanted me to live in eternal shame if I dared leave him. Hell finally detonated on the fateful night of April 4th, 1958, at the mansion at 730 North Bedford Drive. Inside the magnificent pink bedroom, Johnny Stompanato unmasked himself as a psychological murderer when Lana stood firm on her demand for a breakup. The gangster lunged at her like a starving animal. His massive, iron-like hands squeezed her throat, turning her face a ghastly shade of purple as she gasped for air. Amidst her screams, he pressed his face against hers and hissed a bone-chilling threat. "I'll use acid to turn this million-dollar beauty into a putrid mass of rotting meat, so you'll never dare look in a mirror again. If I can't have you, I'll kill your mother and your daughter right in front of your eyes." Watching her mother being brutally assaulted through the crack of the door, 14-year-old Cheryl Crane, paralyzed by a traumatic shock, rushed to the kitchen and seized a 25-centimeter carving knife. The carnage happened in a heartbeat as Stompanato released Lana's throat to lunge at the girl. Cheryl drove the blade deep into his abdomen. Stompanato's corpse collapsed onto the pristine white carpet, his blood spilling out in a raw, crimson flood that stripped away the last of their sordid affair. Lana revealed that this killing didn't just end a bastard's life, it thrust her into the most humiliating trial in history, where her most private bedroom secrets were flayed open before the world. The public mocked her as a woman who had brought a tiger into the home, an egoist who had indirectly robbed her daughter of her innocence until her final breath. Lana Turner continued to call Johnny Stompanato her slimiest scar, a visceral testament to the price of an affair with the shadows of the underworld. 2. Tyrone Power, the angel-faced assassin of the soul. In 1947, Hollywood worshipped Tyrone Power as a living saint, an icon of such ethereal charm that millions of women held their breath whenever his shadow graced the silver screen. But in the suffocating darkness of secret Los Angeles apartments, Lana Turner was forced to endure the ice-cold soul of the lover she once mistook for the love of her life. In her visceral memoir, Lana, the Lady, the Legend, the Truth, she finally unmasked the man behind the myth, a cold-blooded narcissist who viewed women as mere pawns to stroke his own megalomaniacal ego. The affair was a carefully staged performance, a romantic play directed by Power to mesmerize Lana while she was drowning in her desperate marriage to Stephen Crane. He utilized his piercing blue eyes and high-minded vows of devotion to lure her into his bed. But the predatory claws only emerged when Lana delivered the trembling news she was pregnant, instead of a protective embrace. Power cast a gaze of frozen contempt upon her. He saw the life within her womb not as a child, but as a stain, a blemish that had to be bleached away to protect the perfect gentleman brand meticulously sculpted by the 20th century Fox empire. The carnage of her dignity took place in a remote derelict motel on the outskirts of town on a pitch-black night in 1947. The air was thick with the stench of cheap antiseptic and the lingering chill of death. To evade the prying eyes of the press, Power forced Lana into a perilous back-alley abortion performed by an unlicensed doctor. Lana recounted that horrific ritual in blood-drenched detail while she writhed on a tattered bedsheet, her body feeling as though it were being torn in two by the agonizing, crude procedure. Tyrone Power stood in the corner of the dim room like a stone statue. He did not step forward to comfort her. Instead, he remained fixated on his expensive wristwatch, occasionally muttering in annoyance, fearing the secret surgery would make him late for his call time the next morning. Lana bitterly recalled. The ticking of his watch that night was the most cruel sound I have ever heard in my life. To Tyrone, a human life and a drop of his own blood were worth less than a scene shot on schedule to consolidate his power in Hollywood. He stood there, waiting for Lana to stop bleeding, only to ensure his filthy secret was buried deep before he slipped out through the back door. The venom of humiliation reached its absolute nadir the following morning, while Lana's body still leaked blood and her soul felt like a heap of cold ash. Power committed a final, sickening act of psychological execution. He forced her to sit at her vanity. He commanded a specialist to cake thick layers of cream and powder onto her ghastly, pale face to hide the evidence of a corpse just stepped out of a slaughterhouse. He compelled her to don her most magnificent gown, a shimmering wax mask of a smile, and stand beside her husband before a forest of press cameras that very afternoon. Power transformed her into a living prop, forcing her to play the role of a fulfilled woman while her heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces, all to shield his clean private life from the slightest whisper of scandal. The final blade that severed the last of her self-respect arrived via a cold letter delivered by a servant just days later. Power casually announced his impending marriage to Linda Christian, someone he claimed possessed more class and purity than a cheap adulteress whom he had drained and discarded like trash. He insulted her as unworthy refuse and then calmly walked down a sun-drenched California aisle, leaving Lana alone amidst the ruins of a trampled life. Until her final breath in 1995, Lana Turner could never purge the image of Power's soulless eyes in that motel room. The eyes of a man who murdered the soul of the woman who loved him just to preserve the halo of the most fraudulent saint in cinematic history. 3. Lex Barker, Tarzan, and the squalid secrets behind the affairs. If Tyrone Power was a direct stab to the heart, Lex Barker was a slow-seeping venom, a man who placed the devil right into the cradle of Lana Turner's family. Lex Barker, the actor famed for his role as the muscular Tartan. A symbol of the wild and of justice, in truth, possessed the ugliest nature Hollywood ever concealed. Their marriage in 1953 was nothing more than a deceptive transaction, where Lana used the wedding ring to shroud her own extramarital cravings, and Barker used it to infiltrate her high society world. But the most revolting truth about this Tarzan lay not just in his deceit, but in the instinct of a sick predator lurking in the shadows of their Beverly Hills mansion. Lex Barker was a ruthless opportunist. He quietly observed and mastered Lana's every habit. He knew perfectly well that while she was absorbed in her secret trysts, sneaking out late at night to find new thrills from other lovers, that was his golden hunting hour. He would stand by the window, counting every second as Lana's limousine rolled through the gates, only to turn back inside and knock on the bedroom door of Cheryl, her daughter, who was just 10 years old. That silent nightmare stretched on for years, gnawing away at Cheryl's childhood like a festering wound with no escape. Barker utilized the very muscle of an action star to crush the frail resistance of a child. He used violence and bone-chilling death threats to lock Cheryl's lips, transforming a luxury bedroom, the place that should have been a sanctuary, into a hell of pain and humiliation. Barker maintained this filthy script perfectly behind the mask of an elegant gentleman every morning as he sat for breakfast with Lana, smiling as if he were the most exemplary husband in the world. The nightmare reached its nadir on a dark night in 1957. Lana returned home from a clandestine affair, the scent of gin and the warmth of another man still clinging to her expensive mink coat, only to find her daughter sobbing uncontrollably in the corner of a pitch-black room. The truth hit Lana like a bucket of ice water poured over her long-standing selfishness. In that moment, she realized a sickening truth about herself. It was during the hours she was obsessed with chasing carnal pleasures, busy betraying her husband to satisfy her own ego, that she had inadvertently abandoned her daughter to a demon masquerading as a hero. She had cheated with fame and lust, and her daughter paid the price with a stolen innocence. The final act was brutal and raw enough to make one shudder. Lana did not call the police immediately, not because she didn't feel the pain, but because the terror of a scandal ruining the radiance she had built with blood and tears held her back. In a frenzy of regret and loathing, she seized a cold, black gun and pointed it directly at Lex Barker's head as he tried to use his usual warm, elegant voice to deny his crimes. She forced him to kneel on the floor, to confess every depraved act in the very luxury bedroom that had witnessed his false vows. Lana wrote in her memoir with a bitter tone, "There he knelt, the public's muscular Tarzan hero, a man once admired by millions, now just a shivering, cowardly pile of meat under my gun. He begged for his life with the same mouth that had defiled my daughter's innocence." Lana cast him out of her life in utter contempt, allowing him to take nothing but his own disgrace. She carried this shame until she closed her eyes forever. The truth is that Lex Barker was just a depraved man who deceived the entire world, and Lana herself, because she was so preoccupied with sleeping with other lovers behind her husband's back, left her daughter to this pervert in their own home. She directly abetted the abuse of her daughter through her own affairs. 4. Fernando Lamas, the Brute. Behind the Latin lover label. In the year 1952, Lana Turner came to the chilling realization that the celebrated Latin lover, Fernando Lamas, was far from the fiery South American dream she had imagined. He was, in truth, a blood-soaked nightmare of the high society elite. They plunged into a torrid, reckless affair right on the set of the film The Merry Widow, a brazen betrayal that unfolded directly under the unsuspecting nose of her current husband and the powerful executives at MGM. While the fawning public worshipped Lamas's smoldering, amorous gaze on the silver screen, Lana later tore away his mask in her memoirs to reveal the hideous truth. This man possessed a soul utterly rotted by pathological narcissism and a manic, suffocating need for control. He did not love her with a gentleman's grace. He sought to possess her like a prize animal to be shackled forever within an iron cage. The ugly secret beneath the polished tuxedo was a jealousy bordering on psychosis. Lamas would frequently lurk behind studio backdrops, his breath heavy with the scent of hard liquor and his eyes bloodshot with rage as he watched any male actor dare to touch his property during a scene. The romance quickly devolved into a mobile prison. He was consumed by a delusional, morbid fear. He believed that if Lana could so easily betray her husband for him, she was surely sleeping with all of Hollywood behind his back every night. She faced a criminal interrogation. He inspected her lingerie, sniffed her hair with extreme suspicion, and counted every second she was out of his sight. When words failed to subjugate her, he used his fists for education. Lamas would frequently yank her by the hair, slam her violently into the walls, and force her onto the floor to lick the grime from his polished leather boots just to apologize for a stray, accidental smile at a stranger. The true tempest erupted on the eve of the most grand film premiere of 1952, inside a room that smelled of fragrant lilies but was thick with the suffocating atmosphere of death. Lana gathered her final shred of courage to declare an end to this filthy affair in hopes of salvaging her dignity. Lamas's reaction was bone-chillingly cold and terrifyingly ruthless. He lunged at her like a bloodthirsty demon who had just been deprived of its prey. Lana's screams were instantly silenced by brutal, heavy punches to her abdomen and chest, using the professional, raw strength of an athlete. He wrenched her arm behind her back until a sickening, dry crack echoed through the silence of the room. Her shoulder had been dislocated. Writhing in agony on the cold floor, her body coiled in pain. She endured his filthy insults as he called her a cheap, drifting woman, unworthy of any respect. Lana later wrote of that horrific moment in her legendary memoir with pure, unadulterated hatred. As I lay there, my breath ragged and gasping in pain, I saw not a single spark of remorse in his eyes, but rather the sick satisfaction of a man who had just broken a global icon. Fernando was no lover. He was a tyrant with a heart cast in cold stone, a man who relished the sight of me being trampled under his shining boots. The finale of that night was raw horror, stripping away the actor's frozen soul for all to see. While Lana lay there in a state of shock and physical torment, Lama stood calmly before the large bathroom mirror. He meticulously adjusted his bow tie and doused himself in the most expensive cologne to drown out the lingering stench of the violence he had just committed. He did not bother to call a doctor or acknowledge the woman bleeding on the floor. He simply walked out the door, dressed in his finest evening wear, and drove to the gala alone, looking absolutely radiant, on the red carpet that night, before dozens of flashing cameras. Fernando Lamas wore that lethal, charming smile, the perfect gentleman adored by all of America, while Lana Turner wept in the shadows of an apartment that he had locked from the outside. The next morning, Lana's humiliation reached the absolute pinnacle of bitterness that any star could endure. To protect her fragile reputation and appease the wrath of MGM Studios, who viewed her solely as a money-printing machine, she was forced to become an accomplice in concealing his crime. She sat motionless for 5 agonizing hours in extreme pain as makeup artists layered thick powder over her bruises. She was forced into a high-collared silk gown to hide the dislocated arm bound tightly beneath the fabric. Lana bitterly confessed in her final pages the man she once saw as a warming fire was actually the cold executioner of her self-respect. She had traded her family and her honor for a sordid affair. She received in return a shattered body and the heavy shackles of shame known as the Latin lover. 5. Clark Gable, the king with a heart of ice and a ruthless abandonment. Before drawing her final breath, Lana Turner named Clark Gable with a loathing she had suppressed for half a century. In her late recorded memoirs, she confessed that the man worshipped by all of America as the king actually possessed a soul cast in permafrost and a pragmatic ruthlessness that chilled the very marrow of the bone. In 1941, the set of MGM's Honky Tonk was no beginning of a fairy tale. It was the grisly scene of a predator stalking its prey. Lana was then a naive 20-year-old, freshly emerged from a shattered marriage to Artie Shaw, while Gable was a 40-year-old monument of power, steeped in intrigue and worldly cunning. Lana revealed that Gable utilized the sheer authority and magnetic pull of an A-list titan to lure her into his bed. She admitted she betrayed her final shred of self-respect for her ex-husband to plunge into his arms, blindly believing she had found a sanctuary of safety. However, that polished mask shattered into jagged fragments before the fires from the doomed aircraft carrying Carole Lombard had even cooled on January 16, 1942. While all of Hollywood was plunged into mourning and all of America sobbed for the widowed king, Lana Turner was the only one to witness the cold-blooded monster lurking behind the crown, instead of a hand to share her grief. Lana was immediately shoved before the firing squad of public opinion as a sacrificial lamb to bleach his gentlemanly record clean. He discarded her without a second of hesitation. For now, the role of the grieving, faithful husband afforded him far more power and public sympathy than a tawdry, illicit affair. He publicly banished her just as the last handful of earth settled on his wife's grave, branding their feelings a stain that had to be purged to satisfy the press. The fatal blade driven straight into Lana's soul took place in Gable's private office at MGM, a place that had once been the sanctuary of his whispered promises. Lana, with a hemorrhaging heart and overflowing with shame, sought him out to beg for a single word of explanation. But what she received was only a look of emotionless contempt from the eyes that were the dream of millions. Gable sat there, casually lighting a cigarette, the thick white smoke obscuring his cruel features as he uttered words as heavy and direct as a sledgehammer blow. "Look in the mirror, Lana. You are just a cheap stain I accidentally smeared on my resume. I am the king. And you were just a high-class whore the studio brought in to amuse me while I was lonely. Get out and never show your face to me again, before I personally erase your name from Hollywood with a single snap of my fingers." He swept her out of his life like a pile of roadside refuse, leaving Lana standing paralyzed amidst her choked sobs and ultimate humiliation, right in the very cradle of cinema that had molded her fame. This brutal closing of the door pushed Lana into a bottomless pit of despair. She lost the lover she had worshipped as a savior, was mercilessly stoned by the public as the destroyer of a sacred widower's image, and was forced to bear her agony alone in the shadows for years. Meanwhile, Clark Gable continued to stride forward as a living saint, receiving the world's adoration and sympathy with the most fraudulent face in history. Lana bitterly admitted that she was forced to stifle her tears, compelled to stand in the same frame and smile radiantly with him at subsequent events because the studio demanded the rotted soul of the king stay hidden. Clark Gable never loved anyone but himself, and Lana Turner, in the end, was merely a deposed pawn in his brutal power game, a bleeding scar she carried until her very last breath. 6. Mickey Rooney, the vile predator behind the mask of comedy. Do not let the baby-faced charm and the radiant smile of the golden boy Mickey Rooney deceive you. Beneath the saintly facade of Andy Hardy, the national son archetype that every American mother in the 1940s yearned for, lay a soul rotted by power and the instincts of a narcissistic predator. In her shocking memoir, Lana the Lady, the legend, the truth, Lana Turner tore open the velvet curtain of nostalgia to brand this icon as one of the most wretched stains of her existence. It began in the summer of 1940, when Lana was a mere 19 years old, a blooming rose full of vitality within the cathedral of MGM. Amidst the ruthless gears of the studio system, where humans were treated like mere components in a colossal radiance manufacturing machine, Lana inadvertently stumbled into a clandestine affair with Rooney. At the time, he was more than just an actor. He was the studio's treasure, a superstar with the leverage to manipulate the entire system. Lana revealed she was mesmerized by his quick-witted speech and harmless appearance, mistakenly believing she had found a pure, youthful love to escape the stifling control of the studio moguls. But Hollywood reality offers no sanctuary for innocence. It only provides room for those who know how to exploit others' bodies to cement their own status. To Rooney, Lana Turner was never a woman to be cherished. She was merely a first-class carnal trophy he needed to conquer to validate his megalomaniacal masculine power before the Hollywood ruling class. This illicit bond rapidly devolved into a revolting stage for Rooney to boast of his hunting prowess, while Lana trembled, hiding herself under a heavy fur cloak in the dark corners of abandoned studio lots late at night to protect her final shred of honor. This diminutive actor was casually shredding her reputation across smoke-filled bar tables. At the Cock and Bull on the Sunset Strip, the sanctuary of the debauched elite, before a drinking circle teeming with powerful directors and producers, Rooney brazenly touted the most sensitive details of their bedroom encounters. Lana bitterly recalled the sensation of ultimate humiliation upon hearing that Rooney mocked her naivety, directly insulting her as a loose woman just to elicit obscene applause and cheers. He did not merely betray her trust. He transformed the intimate hours she gave him into a cheap commodity to serve his own selfish ego, using her dignity to compensate for his own physical insecurities. The foulest venom of this bastard did not truly manifest until decades later, as Lana was descending the far slope of her life and Rooney was flailing in the shadows of public irrelevance. In 1991, while Lana was attempting to gather the remaining fragments of peace for her final journey, Rooney carried out his most squalid act of treachery. He published his memoir. Life is too short, driven by a thirst for cash and the desperate need for a spotlight that had long since extinguished. Rooney ruthlessly butchered his ex-lover's past for cheap attention. He sold the honor of the woman who once loved him by publicly describing her in those pages with raw, derogatory terms as a brainless nymphomaniac. He converted her youthful memories into a hand-to-hand commodity to salvage his own decay, indifferent to the fact that she was battling illness and isolation. Lana's revelation about Rooney in her memoirs is saturated with a mixture of loathing and acrid nostalgia. The day his book appeared on the shelves, I realized this pen-wielding gentleman was even more terrifying than the mafia gun muzzles I once faced at the North Bedford Drive mansion. Rooney never protected me. He simply lurked, waiting until I was old, sick, and at my most solitary to strip my soul bare once more before the entire world. He turned my foolish 19-year-old infatuation into a festering wound that could never be healed. Mickey Rooney did not just steal my innocence. He turned it into a tradable item to save his own ruin. That is the true nature of the most cowardly traitor in Hollywood history. The conclusion of that 19-year-old romance was not a romantic memory, but a shameful record that even America's national son carried within him the venom of the utmost baseness, a man who trampled over the corpse of a dead romance just to entertain the morbidly curious. The tragedy of Lana Turner is the mournful sigh of a beauty icon lost within a forest of cruel radiance, where sincerity was forever trampled under the feet of those who knew only how to love themselves. After all the dapper suits, the dazzling media spotlight, and the most sought-after faces of the era, what remains is but a stinging question: can brilliant fame ever truly compensate for the shattering of a soul that hungered only to be loved? If you feel the sorrow and understand this silent agony, please press like, subscribe, and the notification bell to join us as we unveil the hidden corners of stories never before told behind the velvet curtain of Hollywood.